Hello and welcome to the Child Psych Podcast. I'm Tania Johnson, registered psychologist, registered play therapist, co-founder of the Institute of Child Psychology. Welcome back to part 2 of our highly sensitive children. Today, we have one of our leading researchers, Professor Pluess. Welcome, Professor Pluess.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here.
It's our second time with you, and I learned so much last time. Just a quick introduction into Professor Pluess. He is a developmental psychologist and one of the leading authors in the field of environmental sensitivity, with specific expertise in the development and validation of sensitivity measures, besides significant contributions to theories of environmental sensitivity. He leads several research projects on sensitivity. Professor Pluess, right before we hit record, we were chatting about some of your newer work, and I know we'll thread it through and we'll talk about it as we go today. But just a quick little inkling, what are you working on at the moment?
Various different things. So in children, we particularly focus on the experience of highly sensitive children in school, because a lot of work has been focused on parenting. So we know there's a lot of evidence now suggesting that highly sensitive children are more impacted by the quality of the parenting they receive. So there's quite a bit of research now on how sensitive children are differentially affected by the family environment, but very little research has focused on a very important aspect that makes up the world of children at a school. So we've done, over the last few years, we've done some research on highly sensitive children in primary school, including the development of measures, but also trying to think about how teachers can support those children better. So that's one area. And then we've just about are launching a new measure for adults as well. The original sensitivity scale was developed in 1997.
Wow.
So the last few years, we've been working on a revision with the original authors of the scale, Elaine and Art Aaron. So we just finished that, and the scale is already available, but we'll officially launch it later. So this is for adults, just advancing our understanding of sensitivity and the measurement thereof. And in relation to that, we're also looking into the relationship between sensitivity and mental health, because we do tend to find that there is an association that people that are highly sensitive tend to be at higher risk for anxiety and depression, particularly. So we're trying to explore that a little bit more, trying to understand what's the reason behind that.
Oh, so much work going on. It's amazing to hear about the adult scale, because I actually refer clients to that scale all of the time. So
Yeah.
I had no idea that you guys are working on that. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it's really, I think we really significantly advanced our understanding of sensitivity, because the original scale just had lots of different questions on quite broad topics. But with having access to data from thousands of people, have been able to identify which of those questions are actually the best at capturing sensitivity. And so the new measure has actually a range of subscales that capture specific aspects that define high sensitivity. So I think the new measure is going to be more helpful and more appropriate. Basically, it's building on all the knowledge that accumulated over the last 30 years.
So Michael, last week, Tammy and I spoke about sensitivity more broadly. We spoke about sensitivity at home, and we were leaving the school part for you. But I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of school, what our teachers need to know, what parents need to know when it comes to schooling. What's coming up at the moment?
Well, we find in our research, looking at children more generally at different ages, whether that's children at 3 years of age, or whether that's adolescents at the age of 17, or adults, we do find that on average about 30% of the population seem to fall in that group of highly sensitive. And obviously within that group, you still have some differences. But quite a large proportion of the population, about a third, are highly sensitive. So we're not talking about 1 or 2% of the population that are very different, but we actually have a substantial number of children that would be highly sensitive. And the topic of sensitivity also has become much more popular over the last few years. That means a lot of parents are wondering whether their child might be highly sensitive or might be concerned about their child's sensitivity in the school context. At the same time, teachers have fairly limited understanding of sensitivity. It's not part of their training, or it's often confused with neurodiversity or neurodevelopmental conditions. So it's really important to understand what it means for highly sensitive children to experience school, given that a large proportion in every classroom will likely be highly sensitive and experience the classroom maybe more intensively than others.
It's amazing too when you say that stat of 30%, and that often those classrooms, particularly here in North America, I'm not as sure in Europe, but in North America, the classrooms are optimized for stimulation. So there's lots of colors, lots of posters, there's lots going on in the classrooms, lots of things, lots of clutter. And when we think about that stat, 30%, we actually have to begin to ask, are our classrooms optimized for all of our children?
Yes, I guess the answer to that is probably not. And this really needs to be informed by research. And according to our research, a lot of children are highly sensitive, and they might have slightly different preferences and different needs. And it's not just the classroom or the furniture and how things are arranged, but it's a social situation. It's a social context which can be very loud. It can be chaotic. And for someone who perceives a lot of detail in the environment, that can easily be overstimulating and can be exhausting.
Okay, so the golden question, first of all, how do our teachers begin to identify sensitivity in the classroom?
So I think the first step is for teachers to just be aware of the fact that children differ in their sensitivity. And I think most teachers that have been teaching for a little bit will understand that, actually, yes, children can differ quite substantially in many different ways, and including their temperament or personality, such as sensitivity, but also other aspects like how extroverted are they. Often highly sensitive children might come across as a little bit more shy, maybe hold back a little bit more, but not necessarily, but maybe the majority would fall into that group. Now, they might very well develop out of that more shy behavior. So the first step is for teachers just to be aware that children differ in their personality, and that has implications on their behavior, but also on what's the best environment for them to learn. Because we do know that highly sensitive children, they can excel academically. They actually can do better than other children in the right environment. They reflect deep on things. They tend to be creative. They tend to be fairly empathetic. So they really care about other children and even the teachers, how they're feeling, how they're doing. So they have a lot to contribute, but they're easily maybe drowned out by the loud noises of other children. So, they can easily be, their behavior might be interpreted as they have not much to say, or they're a bit slow. And in fact, they're just, reflecting on things more deeply and actually have a lot to contribute, but maybe hesitant to lift their hands and speak in front of the whole class. So the first step is for teachers to be aware of that. And then the next step is them to know how to actually identify sensitive children. And maybe some teachers have sort of an intuition which children could be more sensitive. But we've developed a questionnaire based on rigorous research approaches to identify the questions that are most helpful in identifying sensitive children. So we developed a questionnaire. It's only 6 questions that helps teachers identify these children, and we have an online tool where they can do that. It's a questionnaire that can be downloaded as a paper format, but it's also possible to do it online and then get the results sent. And that will tell the teacher that maybe this child is highly sensitive and maybe has specific needs, and we provide as well specific tips for these children.
So Michael, I know that I have a ton of teachers listening right now going, where do I find that tool? We will link it in the description below, but where can they go for that? Where can they go for that specific tool?
So that specific tool is on our website, sensitivityresearch.com, and we've just recently launched a tab for sensitive children, particularly for teachers and parents to learn about the sensitivity in children and the needs of those children. And that links as well to various resources that we provide. So that's the scale for sensitive children. But we also developed a training module for teachers where they learn about sensitivity, how to measure it, and how to support sensitive children. That module is brand new, just got launched last week, and it's particularly targeted to primary school teachers, but might also be relevant for parents of children of that age and teachers with children that might go to secondary schools. And so we have that the information specifically for children, the questionnaire that can be used online. It's on the tests, online tests. There's a tab for that. And then we have the training for teachers.
Incredible. Okay, so we're going to rewind here a little bit so our teachers are able to access it to lingo. Is this child highly sensitive or not? It's 6 quick questions. You can receive it via email. You can do it on paper. Once we go, okay, I think what I'm seeing here is that I have a highly sensitive child. What is the next step for our teachers?
So the scale that we developed includes first those 6 questions to find out whether a child is sensitive. It actually gives you feedback of whether that child is sort of at the lower end of this scale, in the middle, or the higher end. So sensitivity is a dimension. Every child is sensitive, but they could be at different points along that continuum of sensitivity. So the questionnaire will give you feedback where the child is. Is it at the higher end, lower end, middle end? And then we particularly obviously are interested in those at the higher end because they might have specific needs. The questionnaire includes 3 additional questions that inquire about the experience of the child of, let's say, overstimulation, or whether the child seems to be overwhelmed in the class context. Because it's the case, there are many sensitive children, and quite a few probably are doing perfectly fine. They found ways that work for them. Maybe the class composition and size fits well with their temperament, so they don't really experience many challenges. They're able to deal with it. But some children might just really struggle. And we did find that in our work, when we look at the classroom quality, that in a classroom that has sort of good quality, the sensitive children are doing as fine as others. But in a classroom that might be a bit more challenging, maybe less emotional support from the teacher, a bit more chaos, that's where the sensitive children might be struggling a little bit more. So those 3 additional questions capture the potential challenges that children would experience in the classroom context. So the teachers get that feedback, and then we provide some suggestions. So as I mentioned, not every child that is sensitive will need specific support, but it's still helpful to know whether a child is highly sensitive or likely highly sensitive. It's not a diagnosis because it's not a disorder. It's not a problem in such. It's just that highly sensitive children, because of their sensitivity, might experience their classroom in a slightly different way. So it would be helpful, or they would benefit from potentially certain adjustments. So we provide a whole range of suggestions of how teachers might be able to support those children.
Beautiful. I know we can't go into all of the suggestions, but what are some of the top suggestions?
I think one obvious one is to minimize overstimulation, to be aware that if a lot is going on, if a lot is demanded of the child, the child that picks up a lot of that information and process it more deeply, they will get overstimulated and get tired. So this could be due to the social context, but also due to the physical aspects of the classroom, the noise, the clutter, bright lights. So in order to minimize overstimulation, it's important to give them breaks. Maybe let them sit alone, maybe in smaller groups, maybe at the edge of a group to reduce the sensory input. Maybe they would benefit from having headphones to sort of provide some more quiet, and providing quiet spaces and opportunities to maybe read a book or something that sort of reduces the stimulation. So that would be a key one. Another one is to give them the time that they need to reflect on things, because they're deep thinkers. So if you ask them a question, they probably don't want to be put on the spot right away, but they would prefer having time to think it through, and then they would probably are happy to present their thoughts and share what they concluded. So they may need extra time to think or answer questions. And another one is to emphasize positive relationships, because sensitive children are particularly responsive to social cues, and they like to get along with others, and they're easily aware of if things don't go well or if someone is not feeling well. So they really thrive on positive interactions. That means discipline can be experienced quite more severely by them than others. So they probably benefit from more gentle discipline, not being told off in front of everyone and not being spoken to in a harsh way, because these children tend to take criticism to heart, and they're actually quite responsive to gentle discipline. So the harsher discipline is wasted on them, it actually harms more than does good. And I think because they are sensitive, they might often view their sensitivity as an issue. They might wonder what's wrong with them. Why can't they do things the way that other people do? Why can't they just brush off something like someone else can do? Why do they seem to be so affected by that? Or why do they get tired more quickly? So it's good to build their self-esteem and emphasize their strengths that they have, that they might not necessarily see themselves, as we are usually less aware of our strengths and more aware of our weaknesses.
Michael, what I love about everything that you're saying here is that it's so focused on how do we nurture their sensitivity where we go. This is actually an incredible gift that you have, as you're talking about that depth of processing, as you're talking about that creativity, that empathy. And all of the guidance that you're giving right now is how do we nurture that? How do we help them to go, this is who I am in the world, instead of this is something that I need to change, which I think unfortunately is a message that many of our kids are often given by society and by school.
Yeah, I think it's key to acknowledge their specific strengths and what they contribute, and to emphasize that rather than just focusing on, the maybe the behavior that we expect from children, such as raising their hand and saying the right answer and maybe being more resilient and all of that. I think it's important to acknowledge the skills that their sensitive children have. So what we actually find is that in Western cultures, there's less appreciation of sensitivity or introversion. These are two different things, but they're sort of sometimes a bit related. Whereas in other cultures, for example, in China, there's much more appreciation for the sensitive individuals, because they're considered being wise, they're considered as being considerate. So there's much more appreciation in certain cultures of sensitivity. In the West, particularly the more individualistic cultures, such as the US or Canada or the UK, I think there's less appreciation for sensitive individuals, for adults, but also for children. So there's not much appreciation of what they bring to the table. So I think it's key to sort of see the value in what they are able to bring to the table, and to let them know about that as well.
Oh, that resonates so much with me, because I think the messages I hear all the time is, how do you give your kid more confidence? How do you get them to stand up for themselves? How do you get them to speak up in class? But there's also not that flip side of going, how do we actually create spaces for these children to be able to have that time to process, to be able to speak their thoughts that have been deeply processed? And I don't think right now, and I know you're working so hard to kind of flip this dynamic, but I don't think right now that those core features in children are always seen.
No, certainly not. I think that there is a growing awareness of sensitive children. A lot of that is not based on very good science or not on science at all, but we hope to make a difference with that by doing more research. There is a lot more research that's being done on these children. I think it's important to emphasize that these children they don't have superpowers either. It's not like, they're just children, but they perceive their environment in a slightly different way. It's not necessarily that they have a sixth sense. It's but they perceive more what goes on around them. They process that more deeply, and that has some disadvantages in the sense that they will be more negatively affected by adverse experiences. They might be more overwhelmed by stressful experiences, but at the same time, they might be able to really engage with a topic in much more depth. They might pick up on a lot more detail, and they might really understand other people very well. So many therapists, many coaches are likely going to be highly sensitive people, because these are the skills that you need to work with others. You really need to be able to put yourself into the shoes of someone else and sort of have that level of empathy, which these children are fantastic at. And we have recent evidence where we actually were using the teacher scale to measure sensitivity in a primary school, several primary schools in the UK. And we found that the children that were rated by the teachers as more sensitive, they actually showed higher levels of emotion recognition that was assessed objectively. So we found that the children rated as more sensitive were better at recognizing emotions in adult faces. So they seem to have those advanced perception skills that can be really helpful in many different ways. And also the creativity, because they are reflecting on things deeply, they tend to be more creative. Now, maybe not every highly sensitive child is the same. Not all of them might be having the same level of empathy or creativity, but many of those highly sensitive children might be particularly creative. And, this is a gift that needs to be nurtured. But interestingly, as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily a superpower. And all the work that has been done now on giftedness and sensitivity suggests that there is no association. So highly sensitive children are not necessarily the same as gifted children. So their IQ might not be, extremely high, but there is some evidence that sensitive individuals score a little bit better on creativity. And we actually found in our study that the sensitive children do better in school. And that could be due to them having maybe, wanting to do really well and engaging well, and maybe doing whatever they have been asked to do. They're more likely to actually stick to that and do that.
Incredible. As you say that, Michael, you can correct me here, but my understanding is even though our sensitive kids don't fare well in adverse situations, they're at a higher risk, as you mentioned, for things like anxiety and depression. When we put interventions in place, research-backed interventions for these children, they tend to thrive. So it goes both ways with these kids.
Yeah, that's important to remember, that because they are more perceptive what goes on around them, and they process things more deeply. It depends on the quality of their experiences and what they process. So if they have experienced trauma or adversity, they might be more likely to develop problems in response to that. But we also find in our research that the highly sensitive children, they seem to be benefiting particularly strongly from psychological interventions. And we also have some research findings suggesting that they benefit more from exposure to nature, for example. They're more appreciative of positive experiences. So if you take a sensitive child to an arts exhibition, or they listen to some music that is meaningful to them, they'll probably get more out of that than a less sensitive child.
Incredible. Michael, do we know in terms of psychological interventions, so we mentioned nature and music, but in terms of actual psychological interventions, do we know which ones are best for our highly sensitive kids?
I think I wouldn't be able to say this based on the state of the research at the moment, because there is a limited amount of interventions that have been investigated in relation to sensitivity. So the interventions that I know where sensitive children seem to respond more strongly to is a resilience promoting intervention that we've been running in the UK. There is a anti-bullying intervention that has been run in Italy, where sensitive children seem to benefit more. Mostly their victimization experienced was reduced by that, and their mental health was improved. There are some interventions with adults where we do find that as well. My hunch is that they really benefit from talking, basically not talking therapies, because we're not talking about a therapy in that sense, but interventions where there's a social element to that. So especially in smaller groups, I think they benefit from trusting and supportive adults. And I think because they can develop strong bonds to adults, they benefit particularly strongly from positive relationships with adults. That could be a teacher, that could be a therapist. So we generally do find that individuals that are highly sensitive respond more strongly to various interventions. Most of them have a social element. In adults, we do find that they respond more strongly to interventions. But the interesting thing is that positive response often emerges a bit later. So it's not immediately there after the intervention, but sometimes it shows a bit later. And our interpretation thereof is that in the first instance of experiencing an intervention, this can be it can be challenging, or it can be upsetting, or it just requires change. It requires adjustments. So the benefits might not show immediately afterwards, but as the people that have experienced the intervention are applying what they've learned, they start reaping the benefits. And that's certainly what we see in highly sensitive individuals. We see that in adults. We see it also in children, that the benefits of intervention seem to emerge after the intervention, which suggests to me that they seem to internalize what they've learned as part of the intervention or the intervention program. They seem to internalize that more deeply through their depth of processing. And then they are more likely to apply it in their day-to-day life. And that's how they might be more likely to benefit from those interventions.
It's incredible. And I think for schools who are looking at how do we shift things, I think that that's so hopeful too, because it's like, okay, just put programs in place. And it's not just when the program is in place, its effect is going to be felt afterwards by many of us as educators.
I think it's also important to emphasize that sensitive children don't necessarily need an intervention. They don't necessarily need a program. Most of them would probably do just fine. But what we provide in our teacher training online module, which goes on for about an hour, is teachers learn about what is sensitivity, how can you identify highly sensitive children, but then also how can you adjust maybe your classroom, how can you adjust your teaching so that you cater to the whole range, the whole spectrum of sensitivity, and not just those that are, at the lower end of the spectrum, but also the highly sensitive ones. So they may not need an intervention, they may not need a therapist. Most of them certainly don't need a therapist, but they might benefit from arranging the classroom in a slightly different way.
Michael, my last question for you. I know that there's parents listening in right now going, this sounds just like my child. My child is maybe struggling at school. They need a little bit of extra support. How do I even begin to approach the school on this? What are your thoughts?
I think the first step is as well for the parents to really understand what sensitivity is and what it isn't. Also, I need to say that sometimes children experience problems in school. It may not be necessarily because of their sensitivity. It could be other issue. So it's important to clarify what are the specific needs of the child. And one way is to obviously looking at our questionnaire. We have questionnaires on our website specifically for parents to rate their child. We have information for parents and teachers on our website where they can find out and learn a little bit more about what sensitivity is. But also, we always make clear this is not a diagnosis. Our measures are not diagnostic tools. And especially if a child experiences more significant issues at school, it may be necessary for them to be seen by a specialist that is aware of other issues as well. But the first step, or a step where if a parent of a highly sensitive child would like to inform or would like to see that the teacher of the child is more knowledgeable about sensitivity, obviously they're welcome to point to our resources that are specifically developed for teachers. And we have this online training module, which is just 1 hour, which is targeted at teachers, but might also be helpful for parents. And I think in the first instance, it would be great for parents to complete that module, especially towards the end. We have all these suggestions of how maybe a teacher can support a highly sensitive child. And then the parent could look at these suggestions and compare that with the day-to-day reality of the classroom and maybe make some suggestions to the teacher directly what might be helpful for their specific child. But I think, obviously, in the end, we would like to see a world where the teachers are aware of the fact that there are sensitive children in their classroom and know how best to support them, but also to sort of just acknowledge them and encourage them. And often there is the temptation or the pressure for sensitive children to mask their sensitivity in school because they want to fit in. And I've heard from several stories of sensitive children not being perceived as being sensitive in the school because they sort of mask those behaviors. But when they come home from school, they feel completely exhausted because for a whole day they sort of, try to keep themselves together and function like a less sensitive child, and that obviously is taxing. So when they come home, they can be quite exhausted. So to some degree, that is something that sensitive people have to deal with. They need to be able to find ways to deal with the pressures of the day-to-day life. But then, they may need time to recharge and to recover. Ideally, that time would be shortened because they are in a classroom where there are opportunities for them to find a break and avoid the overstimulation extending across the whole day.
And Michael, what I find so incredibly powerful about your work and your team's work is that when I, as a therapist, have worked with highly sensitive children, it's often the school day that is most taxing for them. That school day is a huge chunk, and then it impacts other areas when they get home or before school, whatever it may be. So I think that when we can start to kind of look at what helps all of our children from a holistic perspective, that's how we change the world.
Absolutely. And I think anything that helps the highly sensitive child is likely going to benefit other children too, right? So it's not like they need something completely different. Having time to process, avoiding overstimulation is probably a good thing for most children. But, less sensitive children may not need the space to process. They may not need to avoid overstimulation because their thresholds are different, and they might enjoy that stimulation that's ideal for them, but for a highly sensitive child it might just be too much. But if we can structure the school environment in a way that the highly sensitive children do find spaces where they can process and sort of experience a less stimulating environment, even if it's just for 5-10 minutes every few hours, then that might be sufficient for them to avoid being overstimulated and coming home completely exhausted.
Michael, we're going to link the website, the rating scales, the course in the description below for everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so excited about all of your work. It's incredible.
You're welcome. I'm very glad I was able to share that on the hope that all these tools will be helpful for many, many parents and teachers, and eventually that many highly sensitive children will live happier lives because of them.
Thank you. We would love to continue to walk with you on your parenting and professional journey. Whether you're looking to enroll in a single course, join our free summit, or sign up for either our professional or parenting membership, we have something for everyone. And if you haven't joined us yet, our Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and weekly newsletters are full of free resources and quick tips. Links can be found in the show notes. Together, let's raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhood.